On.
Thank you so much for having us, Arlen. It is so great to see so many familiar faces with us today, and such an honor to be co-presenting with a best friend of mine, Dr. Allison Slade. Allison, as I mentioned, I hold Arlen and the IPA family close to my heart. I've known Arlen for a long time. In fact, folks, Arlen is one of the reasons that I'm the presenter I am today, because he coached me many moons ago. So I'm so excited to be back home for IPA. And so, Allison, I know when we were crafting this presentation, we really wanted to give people practical tools and practical solutions, because we know that for this work to be equitable, it can't be prescriptive. We really have to give folks this chance to share and craft. And so, friends, we prepared a big old deck for you all. We might get through all of it, or we might find ourselves in awesome conversation. Know that if we don't get through every slide or every activity, that Allison and I can always share slides and handouts. Mary, our operations director, is with us as well, and she is at your disposal. So feel free, if you need a slide or a link to something in the chat, she's got you covered. And so, Allison, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Well, I'm very happy to be here. I love the Illinois Principal Association. I was a member, I still am a member, but not as an acting principal. I've been in the field of education for about 25 years, and I spent about 14 years as a school principal. I left the principalship in 2018, and now I currently train principals. So I run the principal preparation program at Roosevelt University, and then do a lot of supporting of leaders and aspiring leaders on the side. And my claim to fame these days is I am the mother of a middle schooler, which, if you have a middle school girl, you probably have some empathy for me. I'm really trying to learn to navigate this new developmental level, which does cause a lot of fatigue on my part as well. So happy to be here with Carla and provide some more color around, leadership in this. And everyone is a leader. So I always say, even though you're a teacher in a classroom, you have a leadership role in your classroom as that teacher and with your colleagues and things like that. So we're definitely going to look at lots of different elements of social and emotional learning, and specifically looking at fatigue today. And we're happy to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Allison. And so I am Carla Tantillo Philibert. I am the founder of Mindful Practices and the co-founder or COO of the SEL check-in platform, Class Catalyst. So excited. We have friends with us who are using Class Catalyst in their schools. Hooray, hooray. I'm the author of 7 books on social emotional learning and classroom management, one written with my dear friend here on digital social emotional learning. And I am the mother of 2 little ones. Mine are 4 and 6, almost 7. And so mine are like, my 4-year-old's like, I don't want to go to school. I want to stay home with grandpa all day. Of course you do, because grandpa feeds you popsicles all day. So who wouldn't want to stay there? And so what we're going to do, friends, is we're going to kick it off. I lead us through some activities. Then I'm going to turn over to Allison, and Dr. Slade will run through the next set of slides. And so we'll be with you together, bouncing back and forth. And again, as I mentioned, we strongly encourage you to participate in the chat. Mary will also be giving away some Starbucks cards. And so to hear your voices and encourage that participation, we're going to be just floating a little Starbucks your way. So keep an eye out for that. Again, I'm the founder of Mindful Practices, and the work that Allison and I are going to talk to you about today is around voice and agency and connection. Often we talk about this work in silos, like the voices of the students or only the voices of the teachers. And instead, we're going to be thinking about, how do we talk about voice and agency with adults in our school buildings across the school system, and that connection, not just student to teacher, but amongst adults. Now, what are we doing today? We're going to define well-being. We're going to unpack fatigue. So many of us have thought about fatigue maybe myopically, like it is or isn't this. And Allison's going to unpack that. Oh, wait, friends, what about this? What about that? We're going to explore insourcing and outsourcing, and we're going to write some scenes like, what is future me going to do differently? And we're going to think about mapping out next steps. Now, as I mentioned, we only have an hour together today. We want space for your voices. So never fear if we don't get through everything in the deck. We've got you covered. We're here to support. And so let's start with a pop check. Now, Allison, I don't know about you, But even though you and I talk about this stuff quite a bit, sometimes it's hard for me to actually find time to practice. Do you find that as well?
Yes, I do.
We're busy people, everybody. And so always with grace, right? Just like giving yourselves a minute, not feeling guilty. We don't make time for this more, just like checking in. So we're going to push our chairs back. We're going to find our feet. We're going to roll our shoulders back. Now, we always want to engage in this work with a lens of cultural humility. We want to be culturally responsive. So Allison and I aren't going to mandate, you got to close your eyes, you got to sit up tall, you got to do this. You do you. What works for us as 46-year-old white woman may or may not work for you. And so whatever you're bringing to the table, whatever your story, whatever your context, own that and know that you're just where you're supposed to be. Whatever you're doing is just what you're supposed to be doing in this moment. And so eyes are closed, our gaze is soft and focused, and breathing. Noticing where you are. Noticing the lens that you're bringing to this work today. What it is, what it isn't. One more deep inhalation together. And exhaling whenever you're ready. Coming back to us, maybe that's opening the eyes, identifying a few things in the room that are familiar. And then coming back to our presentation. Now, Allison, before we move forward, let's talk about your lens real quick. What is the lens that you bring to this work? Is it the exact same as mine, or is it the exact same with everybody that's with us today on the webinar?
Of course not. We all bring everything that we have experienced and, all the way from when we were children till now. So it's really important that you look at these tools with your own lens and what you need and how you can use them.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. And so this is a pop check. Again, we see this as a lifelong practice. Many of you that have worked with us know that this is a practice we use with adults. We encourage you, leaders, team leaders, building leaders, start your next faculty meeting with a pop check. Give space for folks to just pause, check in with their breath, cultivate that awareness of self, connect, whether it's connect with themselves or connect with a colleague and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing today. And then choose a practice. Again, we want these practices for there to be voice, for there to be agency, for there to be a connection. If I love yoga, it doesn't mean you're going to love yoga. If you hate Zumba, it doesn't mean I'm going to hate Zumba. So you do you. Now, it's really important to note that when we say well-being, we're intentionally not saying self-care, right? Our focus here is on holding up the collective. And we encourage you as well to think about your work, like, yes, what works for you, but then also what works for your community. How can it be we're raising all boats? Because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I had a stressful day. I'm going to go out on the town tonight. I'm going to have to call in sick tomorrow because I drank a little too much. And then I'm going to put everybody out that in my school because there's no subs, right? So really thinking about how our choices impact community, how our community impacts our choices, without like lens of right or wrong or shame or guilt, but just again, building that awareness. And when we think about definitions here, there's a lot of definitions floating around. The one that we like to lean on for this presentation is looking at the World Health Organization definition of mental health and well-being. One of the reasons that Alice and I particularly like this definition is for that middle part that's highlighted here, understanding one's emotions and reactions of others. So again, what am I bringing into the room with the work? How is what's happening in the room impacting me? And then moving forward to seeing ourselves instead of being victimized by our circumstances, but acting with agency. Acting with agency. Now, that doesn't mean, friends, that we don't look soberly at how hard life is or how tough our circumstances are. It's not that we're Pollyanna, right? We don't say, oh, everything's great. No, we're taking a sober look at the circumstances that we're in, and we're moving forward as the creative principle. We're saying like, yes, I can take a look at the landscape. I have agency within that landscape, even if that landscape is challenging. And again, Allison will unpack that a little bit more for us now. Now, as many of you know, Allison and I are steeped in the work of social emotional learning. How does this all connect? Well, social emotional learning, as you know, isn't a curriculum, but it's a process. It's a process for students and adults to cultivate and manage awareness. And so we're inviting you on this journey today that we feel is a social emotional learning journey, because the bedrock of social emotional learning is self-awareness. Now, we don't have a ton of time to dig into social emotional learning, but we want to make sure that there's some boilerplate agreements here. When many of us have said, like, oh, we bought an SEL curriculum, then we can check the box on well-being or check the box. And we're here to say to you, oh, wait, friends, training folks or stakeholders in your school is not in an SEL curriculum is not the same as training them in SEL as a discipline, is not the same as training them in well-being. So we have to make sure that we devote airtime to well-being work specifically. The same goes with equity work. Because you've adopted an SEL curriculum or approach doesn't mean that you can check that box on equity. Equity needs its own airtime as well. What is CASEL? Well, CASEL Select programs are evidence-informed and evidence-based. We are CASEL Select. Very proud of that, worked hard for that. And we want to make sure that when we think about this work, we view it as an approach where every caring adult in your school buildings, every caring adult in your school community has a seat at the table. So often, and again, Allison will speak to us about this, this work has been siloed. So it's like, oh, this group of stakeholders in our building, like they're the ones that do SEL, or they're the ones that we're going to approach for the well-being work. And what we're going to talk to you about today is every caring adult in your school community deserves a seat at the table, because every caring adult wakes up in the morning and takes care of kids and takes care of each other. And because of that, their well-being matters. And because of that, let's make sure that we offer training to all these stakeholders. And so when we think about this work, again, the lens that we're going to use today is this lens of self-awareness. How could we as adults increase that awareness of self? Because so often in the work that Allison and I do, we'll work with school communities and we'll say, all right, everybody, let's roll up our sleeves. Tell us, what do you need? And Allison, what do they say to us? They're like,
we don't know.
We don't know, right? We don't know. And we'll say, all right. And it occurs to us, it's because they've never had the space. They've never had the time to figure out what they need. They're running on fumes. They're hustling, especially now during the pandemic, because they're committed adults in school buildings. Man, they are hustling and working hard. So of course they haven't had time to stop. However, if we don't give adults and give ourselves time to stop, how can they possibly meet their well-being needs if they don't know where they are, what they are? It's the same with our students, which is why that SEL work for students is so important. How many times as educators have we said to a student, oh my gosh, why did you just do that again? What happened? And they say to us, I don't know. They're not lying to us. We haven't created space for self-awareness. And so that work that we're doing together today, you're going to hear Allison and I go back to self-awareness as that bedrock competency. Social emotional learning begins with self-awareness. Well-being work begins with self-awareness, because only again, when we know what we need, can we meet those needs. Now, Allison, tell us, schools are complicated places, my friend. How does all this work fit together?
Yes. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper right now into adult SEL. And we start with the why, just like we start with the why in everything that we teach and learn about. And so you can see this complicated graph in front of you, but you see a lot of the ways that we as leaders, either as teachers in our classrooms, or I saw some assistant principals and principals here, leaders in our building, we need to seriously consider the SEL needs and capacities of our staff. And Carla talked about staff meaning every caring adult in the building, not just the teachers. And making sure that everybody that is leading others has the skills and competencies to do that. So again, this is not the wellness or the well-being or self-care that we always, think of and hear about, that Carla was speaking about before. We'll talk about that a little bit later. These are the skills and the competencies that caring adults need to be able to possess themselves in order to teach others. And why? Because on the left-hand side, you saw that social and emotional competence of the teachers, and it impacts all of these different things, right? It impacts our healthy climate. It impacts our ability to have effective classroom management. And it impacts that curriculum or those lessons that you're trying to teach to students, as well as the outcomes that students have in their social and emotional competence and skills that they demonstrate in school. So you can go to the next slide. This is one of those things that you might be like, ooh, this has a lot of words on it. And it does, but it's one of the best slides in the deck. So if it's something that you're interested in getting, a PDF copy of, definitely let Mary know. These are the adult SEL competencies and observable skills that go with these competencies. So lots of times we'll look at objectives or things that we want to teach our students. And, we have to break it down into those skills that we can actually measure. And so what you see on the top are those intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive leadership competencies and the skills that go along with those things so that you as a leader or you as a colleague can identify for yourself, but also then with others, where are your strengths and where are your areas of need, right? And we're going to talk in a little bit about some assessment ideas for these. But as an example, if you look under self-awareness, as we talked about, that's sort of the bedrock of everything. Can you identify times where you have demonstrated your own emotional regulation skills, like thinking rationally regardless of the stressors, or acting and reacting in a professional way, even when you were not in the best emotional state? I'm sure all of us can think of times where we did these things well and where we probably evidenced growth, needing to grow. And so you can really see these skills at the bottom are the things that you are observing for. You're observing for in yourself, and you're observing for in others, or if you're a principal, you're helping lead others too. I don't know if anyone has the opportunity to, you can put in the chat some things that you feel like you do well, those skills at the bottom that you do well, or skills that you need to continue to grow and improve. We all need to do this in different ways. And I feel like this slide in particular is one of those to really dig into after the presentation, because it will help you, if you're a leader, identify specifically what things you need to work with your staff on, but also what you need to work on for yourself. So when we think about adult SEL in pandemic recovery, Carla, you can move to the next slide. We think about it in a lot of different buckets. Obviously, the direct service is what, floats to the top, right? We got to serve our kids. We got to make sure that we have tier 1 intervention. All these kids are coming back with all these different issues. Staff is coming back with all these issues. Then there's curriculum, which we heard mentioned earlier as well. But curriculum exists in both instructional and non-instructional time. And then there's professional development, and that's where sort of our development of adult SEL sits, but that we want to make sure that we're addressing it with all adults in our building. And you can see some of those adults mentioned at the bottom. And what this means to us is that you don't necessarily need like binders of curriculum and things like that, but you really need to embed both SEL for adults and with students into every corner of your school, right? Including all of the things mentioned here. Now, going back to what we talked about before with the competencies, sometimes it's hard to address competencies when you're a leader and you see them in others, things that people do well, but things that maybe they need some support on. And so the thing that I recommend most is doing some self-assessment. And so finding there's a bunch of surveys and self-reflections, as well as rubrics linked into this slide, which you'll have access to after the presentation. And lots of times when I was even a teacher and just a team leader or just a teacher on my team, digging into one of these components, as we've talked about before, self-awareness would be a good one to start with, and really having people self-reflect, right? Why? Why do we self-reflect? Because self-reflection demonstrates our ability to be self-aware, but it also helps people self-identify the tools and the ways that they need to improve. And it allows them to acknowledge their strengths while also seeking some areas of growth and specific support for specific SEL competencies for which they need to set goals. So as you see, this doesn't say always and never, right? What does it say? It says often, sometimes, and rarely. And these might shift in different areas where we can see ourselves. And so many times you'll want to take a survey with a different group of people and have them set their own goals for those skills and competencies that they need to develop in a deeper way. So how is all of this connected to fatigue, which was the title of our session today? Well, another word for fatigue is teacher burnout, right? And all of these things you see on the left side are those warning signs of teacher burnout. And I know that I saw lots of teachers, right, on the session. So now's your time. Which one of these do you see evidencing itself the most for yourself? Put it in the chat. Are you chronically tired and drinking that coffee much more than you thought? I see someone said exhaustion. Where do you see yourself? I love that one that says lost that loving feeling, right? Like the idea that I used to come with such a happy and positive approach, and now I'm overwhelmed, overly cynical. I'm glad you shared that. Thank you. Lot of overwhelmed, right? No desire to keep going. For some people, that means they change their appetite. They're eating a lot more or they're eating a lot less, right? Really trying to notice these signs in yourself and recognize that is part of self-awareness, right? But it's also helpful as a leader to help other people acknowledge where they are finding those stress areas. And you can see that quote on the right. I think it's really important. Teachers who possess strong social and emotional competencies, those things that we looked at a little bit before, are much more likely to stay in the classroom longer because they're able to partner more effectively with students and address student behaviors for burnout, right? Those are the same things that cause teacher burnout. So how do we take these symptoms and say, what are we going to do with them? Well, the first thing we need to do is think about where they fall on the different forms of adult fatigue. So I see a lot of people talking about chronic fatigue. And with the pandemic, I have found it really helpful to work with teachers and with leaders on really identifying what type of fatigue they are feeling. Are they feeling compassion fatigue? Are they feeling crisis fatigue? Are they feeling decision fatigue? So in order to really figure out what fatigue, so someone said mental fatigue, there are all types of mental fatigue. So we'll talk about that in 1 second. Let's populate each of these squares with the actual definition of what these types of fatigue are. Crisis fatigue, all the way on the left, you can see, is the stress that ongoing fatigue has on the mind and the body, right? It's that prolonged stress. And yes, that can happen if you're exposed to a war or economic depressions, or that word we see right at the end, a pandemic that has lasted longer than any of us really think about it, right? So that is crisis fatigue. That is fatigue that has come about as a result of an environmental factor that has impacted us. That kind of fatigue is different than what we see in the middle, the blue box, the decision fatigue. Sometimes crisis fatigue leads to additional decision fatigue, but decision fatigue is that state of low willpower that results from having to make too many decisions at once, right? And so what does it lead to? It makes us put less effort into the choices we make, which as a school leader or as a teacher could be difficult, because then it will lead to increased behaviors, either in your teachers or in your students. And we hear all the time about compassion fatigue, right? Which layers on top of all of those. It is the cumulative effect of stress resulting from caring for others that are traumatized, right? So as teachers, we probably have a lot of crisis fatigue going on, right? Which leads to compassion fatigue because we're taking care of others who also have been exposed to this crisis, and then leads to decision fatigue, right? Because we don't want to make any more decisions. So really figuring out where you are in this process, or where the teachers that you serve are in this process, may assist in identifying some of the activities, right, that will help us move out of that fatigue. So Carla, let's look at the next slide and we can sort of tag team these together, right? These are activities listed on the slide that lead to regulation, which is that brain-body connection, that cross-lateral connection that we want to make sure exists so that we can continue to function as adults, or that children can continue to function as children as well. And so you can see not all of these are necessarily mapped exactly to where they might be needed, but sometimes when I'm experiencing decision fatigue and I think about like, gosh, I don't want to make another decision, I do something that doesn't require me to make a decision, right? Some of the things on here like journaling, doodling, drama, that I have to decide what I'm going to draw, right? Or what I'm going to doodle, right? That's not a good solution for decision fatigue. A good solution for decision fatigue, you see a lot of those things at the bottom, is being super active, going and getting out your stress and then coming back to the decisions you need to make can be very helpful in avoiding that decision fatigue. If you have crisis fatigue, which many of you probably have as a result of the pandemic, thinking through those things at the top, doodling, journaling, drawing, doing some art or guided imagery, doing what we did at the beginning of the session together, a pop check, right? Really helps us slow down, regulate ourselves, and say, I can do one more thing, right? I can do one more thing. I'll give you an example. Right before we got on here, I had to register my daughters for dance. And, you know, it's this online crazy system. And my daughter got locked out of her point class, her ballet class. And I'm like, not regulated, yelling at the computer, wanting to call the dance studio, yell at them. Like, you know, my kid has been doing this for so long. So what do? I turn to and I say, okay, I'm going to just take a moment away. I'm going to breathe. And then I'm going to register for her for a class that's above her level. And I'm going to tell the dance studio that if they can't get her into her level, I've already paid for the next level. And so what does she need to do for the next level, right? I'm going to solve my problem by breathing and moving a little slower. So Carla, can you maybe add a little bit about some activities that you're thinking about for one of the areas of fatigue, and then move us into sort of thinking about the different roles that we play and how this fatigue may impact us, just like I was talking about a parenting decision, right? That's one of the hats that I wear. How these different hats can also impact how we self-regulate.
Thank you, Allison. So well said. And friends, please remember, we want to hear your voices. So this is the perfect time to raise your hand. Arlen will unmute you. And then for everyone that shares, we're going to give you a $10 Starbucks gift card. So Mary will call on for this activity, the first two people to raise their hand. And so Allison, I'd love to share one of the examples that I got. I was one of our partners. I don't remember if it was Texas or California, and somebody shared that flipping pancakes is so it's her moment to be in the zone. Like, and she said, you know, I feel like my children have had pancakes a lot for dinner during the pandemic. Oh my gosh, I'm a terrible mother. I said, you're not a terrible mother because you're modeling regulation for them. And trust me, what kid in the world isn't thrilled to push the broccoli aside and have some pancakes? And so, right? I mean, Allison, would you agree?
That makes me laugh only because making pancakes is super stressful for me because I always flip it too early and then you push it down and there's like, batter that comes out and then it's like not pretty. And then, so it's funny because I actually find that activity extremely stressful and I would not use it to regulate myself.
Well, that's the beauty of this, right? Is that even though Allison and I are such close friends, like I love the pancake thing. I was like, that's brilliant. Allison's like, no, keep it away. And that's the part, friends, is that instead of looking at this work to be prescriptive, our cue to you is look at yourself. Look at cultivating your awareness of self. So that way, you know what meets your needs. You know, you're not choosing the activity that stresses you out. For instance, Zumba, fabulous for some people. For me with 2 left feet, oh my gosh, stressful nightmare. Dance, stressful nightmare. And so really thinking about like, what are the things that serve me and when do they serve me? And giving yourself permission to fail a little bit. Maybe you're saying, gosh, I went for the doodling, for the decision fatigue, and then it didn't work. Okay, try something else. Try something else. It's the willingness to be open and the willingness to try. And so, Allison, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add to bring in our audience a little bit.
Yes.
I saw a lot of fatigue, right? I saw a lot of people who are chronically tired, exhausted. Is there anything on this list that you see here that helps you get out of that exhausted and tired feeling? And to Carla's earlier point, she will get you out of that exhausted and tired feeling by giving you a Starbucks card if you want to share. So you can raise your hand or just put it in the chat. Walking and running. Yes, drinking alcohol does count as long as you don't. Here's Grace. All right, let's hear from Grace. She has her hand raised.
So I don't, I saw the list and this is not on my list, but, or on the list of the strategies, but I like to wash the dishes. I have a window, I look out the window and I wash the dishes and that helps me self-regulate what I'm going through for the day. And I just kind of empty my mind as I wash a plate or a bowl.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Grace. Make sure
live
to
in
put
Chicago. Do you? Because Grace, you can come to my house.
I know. Grace, make sure to put your email address in the chat for Mary and she will grab it so that she can send you a card. Julie, you're up next, and then I'll share a couple that I see in the chat. Thanks for sharing, everyone.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I actually put one in the chat and it was listening to music, but I also enjoy listening to podcasts on my way home, on my drive home, and that just kind of helps me relax.
Do you have any favorites that you want to share?
I love Disney World, so usually it has something to do with Disney World. I also listen to Truth for Teachers by Angela Watson quite a bit. I don't know, I have several favorite ones. Fill in the blank, the Dr. Phil one I've been listening to recently. So I just try to find different ones and I don't know, just kind of gets your mind off of things.
Yeah, that's great. I noticed the doodling, the using colored pencils. If you've seen those adult coloring books, if you're a principal on this call, there's a great adult coloring book with an inappropriate word in the title that you should get for yourself by Googling it on Amazon. It's a really great one. And it just makes you laugh, right? And feel better. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Julie and Grace.
Awesome. Awesome. And again, putting email addresses in the chat. Allison, is there one more friend? And then we'll keep it going. What do you think? Is that anyone else want to share here?
No more hands being raised yet. Come on. I'd be hungry for
There is a lot of things in the chat. I love the listening to music. Someone said running and walking, singing badly. Someone said cooking, and actually, like, I wouldn't originally say that, but I agree. I do use cooking as a way to escape, right, and do something else that needs to get done, and then come back. So, so that is a really good recognition of you. We have one more hand, Tammy, and then we'll move on.
I said cooking. I love to cook. So during the pandemic, when our school was on full remote, I love to cook everything homemade. So I stayed home and that's what I did. I cooked and it was very relaxing for me.
Rock star. You're a rock star. Seriously, you're a rock star. So this gets us here, Tammy, to the hats that we wear. So Tammy, do you think that the hat that you wear is that you're like the cook, the homemaker, the school leader, or the educator? How many hats, Tammy, would you say that you wear from this list, my friend?
I'm the mom, the daughter. Gosh, I'm a sister, wife,
Okay.
housemaker at that time, cook, a pet mama, bestie. I cooked for my church at the time too. My son had just come home from the military, so he and his wife were living with us. So yeah, I wore several hats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Allison, you tallied up your hats one time. All of the hats. Thank you, Catherine. I think Allison, yours were like 18 or 19. You had Mary. How many hats are you wearing, my friend?
I lost track of that. Many hits, way off the meter.
So friends, you might be saying right now, okay, if I'm wearing all these hats, then what's the magic formula? Which one should I choose? Which activity, which practice? And so we have a little game for you. Everybody get a paper and pen, ready to go. Get your calculators out. We are going to give you exactly 90 seconds to tabulate how many points worth of challenge you have had this year. And this is going to help you figure out your well-being. What's your formula for well-being? So here we go. First, tabulate how many points worth of challenges if you had this year. You have 90 seconds. Go.
So the rest of our lives were fed well. New slang when you notice the stripes, the dirt in your fries. Hope it's right when you die.
60 seconds. 60 seconds, friends.
Dawn breaks like a bolt through the hall. Never should have called, but my head's to the wall and I'm lonely.
All right, Terry's leading us to the pack here. Terry's put her total in chat. Please add your totals to chat. Woo! All right, Allison, what do you think of these numbers as they're coming in? What do you think about these numbers as they're coming in?
There's a lot. I was asking if like I could take the bottom one and multiply it by 50 because I actually think that my salary should be increased a lot.
Absolutely. Okay, friends. So the numbers coming in, Alex, at least 1,000, right? Daniel can't count emails. I know. All right. So here's the magic formula, friends. Are we ready? Let's see. Oh, let's take a look at your scores. If you scored 500 or more, ooh, ouch, 250, 100, 99. Okay. Now, Mayor, Allison, is there really a magic formula? Are we joking? Like, Allison, is there really a magic formula? So if my score is over 500, is something wrong with me? What's happening here?
You have to, well, I can't say that, right? But you have to figure out how you kind of compartmentalize, right? And exhibit your ability to be well in the different hats that you have.
Absolutely. And of course, Allison and I are adding some levity. There is no magic formula. There's no way to really score this stuff, right? And so this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time together, this next 18 minutes, is that the solutions that we offered you on the previous slides take time. So if you are stressed and you're dysregulated and we're saying to you that your well-being matters, that's not enough. And this is just another one of those well-being presentations like the ones you've seen before that are like, you matter, do Zumba. So instead, what we're going to talk about is where you find the time. If we know there's no magic formula, and if we agree that this can't be prescriptive, then this really has to be unique to you. Now, Mary and Allison know that I came smack. I mean, this hit me, this question smack in the face during the pandemic, right? I'm 2 small children. I'm running a business. And I found myself with not enough hours in the day and work to be done. And so I sent a question to some friends, and this is just me talking. So it says, hey, ladies, taking a poll, who has had their house cleaned? I thought this might be the magic bullet for me. If I can figure out a house cleaning situation, find a housekeeper, maybe it'll free up enough time for well-being. Well, this was way more complicated than I had anticipated. It was way more complicated than I had imagined. One of the reasons there were socio-political contexts and constructs that I hadn't weighed in. And many of them were, when I talked to my friends, many of my issues with this might have been like how I identify as a woman, as a human being in the world, what things I could let go of, what things I wasn't willing to let go of. And so if I let go of this, does that mean I'm less of a mom? If I take this on, does that mean I'm prioritizing work over being a mom? And so like, how do I unpack all this? Now, coincidentally, I went to Iowa to give a presentation as I was like figuring this out. And those of you that might have seen my keynote at the Wellbeing Summit, I talked about this at length. And so a woman came up to me and she said, Carla, I have $3,500. What should I do? So we're talking about disposable income here. And she was making a choice about disposable income. Now, for this scenario in this conversation, we have to assume or presuppose a little disposable income. However, I want to be clear, and we want to be clear, and we say that is not everyone's reality. That is not everyone's situation. And so we want to recognize that from the jump. And so she said, should I go to Mexico? Should I get a gym membership, or should I have my house cleaned? And I was like, oh, okay, well, self-care wise. She's like, well, they all cost the same. And I was like, well, what if you just go to the Wisconsin Dells and then you pay somebody to clean your house and you do an online gym membership? And she was like, no, I want to go to Mexico. Thanks. Right. And I was like, wait a second here. This conversation is hitting upon this larger question about well-being. Now, in this case, we're going to center around the question of how we spend disposable income, right? Really saying like how disposable income translates often into time. So in her mind, going to Mexico was taking care of her well-being, where in my mind, going to the Dells and then spending some money every month to have someone clean your house or clean my house, that's going to translate more to well-being. And so right now in the chat, I'm going to ask you, friends, if you had the choice, would it be Mexico, having somebody come clean your house, or a trip to the Dells, or a combination of the online yoga class and a trip to the Dells and a housekeeper? What would it be? And so right now, if you put it in the chat, what is the thing that translates to your well-being? Now, maybe not immediate well-being, because who wants to turn down a trip to gorgeous Mexico? When you look at your sustainable well-being and the choices we make long-term. So Allison, what are we seeing in the chat? Oh,
lots of different responses, lots of Mexico. Someone wants to just save their money for early retirement, which I can empathize with and I agree with. Someone really likes smelling pine sol when they get home. So lots of different answers for sure.
Lots of different answers. Now, this is where we get, friends, to this point around self-awareness. So bringing it on back home. This is our self-awareness moment. Again, Allison and I aren't saying to you, well, you're wrong for choosing early retirement, or you're right for choosing Mexico. But instead, if we say we have choice, we have agency, we are the creative principle, which shifts it a little bit. Now, this is hard because right now, many of us feel powerless, not powerful, which equates to having choice. We feel like we're the victims of this pandemic. We're the victims of our circumstance. And while these circumstances are truly, truly hard, and we're holding that, then Allison and I are also asking you to hold the truth that if you move away from seeing yourself as victimized by the circumstance, but instead see yourself as being the creative principle, like we got choice. We're choosing the Dells and the housekeeper because that's going to free up time. And even though Cancun is beautiful this time of year, what's going to sustain our well-being long-term? What's going to buy us time to go for that walk, to garden, to cook, to spend time with the bestie is not going to be the sparkly Mexico trip. It's going to be the Dells and the housekeeper. And so this answer is different for everyone. Now, in the work that Allison and I have done with University of Chicago Chapin Hall, we've collected data. Now, Allison, tell us here about some of the data we found, because these choices are not easy, are they?
No, I think number one, too, we got to remember that we have to harness the power and make the choice, because otherwise the choice is going to be made for us, right? And so here on this slide, you can see teachers' explicit social emotional competency. So we surveyed 644 teachers. That's how many are in this. And this is their ability to talk about these concepts. So this is like their self-reporting of their knowledge and skills related to these topics, right? And then next, you see their competency of SEL integration. So this is their ability to actualize what they just said. So this is how they demonstrate, right, in the moment. So what do we notice between these two slides? Can you go back? 20.2%, go forward for body awareness, 13.8. It's going down. So what does that tell us? That means that in general, teachers and leaders can talk about these concepts, but they don't actually do them or demonstrate them, right? And this is even more stark when we look at leaders, right? The other thing that we notice between these two slides is that that bottom component right here, leadership, empathy, peer, right? Those are on both slides on average a little bit higher, right, than the intrapersonal, right, or in ourselves competencies. So what does that tell us? That is a reflection of what we've been teaching ourselves as teachers and ourselves as leaders for as long as I can remember teaching anyone. And that is this bottom word, servant leadership, that we are here to serve others. And for sometimes, unfortunately, while the concept is really important to soak in and make part of your being, sometimes what it looks like to the outside then, and then what we feel on the inside is that that servant leadership is actually more important than our own well-being, right? And this I took off the internet, like is what it says. The ideal measure is someone who does this, right? And what the biggest and most important thing is that you don't do this for others while you don't do it for yourself. They need to be done simultaneously, right? And so what Carla said before, self-awareness is critical, thinking about how do you get out of this fatigue that we talked about? That's going to be individualized and it's definitely not the same for everybody, but making sure that you personalize it and that you make a plan for yourself, right, is really important. So Carla, how do we do that?
Well, Allison, thank you so much. This is tricky. This is tricky. And Allison, you're getting us there because you're getting us to tackle this identity piece, which is listed here, which is like, I'm a servant leader. I'm a servant educator. And that means I'm putting everybody first before me. And if I don't, it means that I'm a crappy servant leader, we got to change our vocabulary, friends. We have to change the narrative. We're going to tackle things like guilt and shame. Guilt, right? That's coming internally. Shame, the gaze of others. So if I leave work on time, well, I must be a bad teacher. Oh, I better scoot out of the building with my hood up, right? And so really tackling some of these identity pieces that get in the way. Now for me, right, what did I decide? Did I go with laundry? Did I go with cooking? Did I go with having somebody clean my house? Well, I went with somebody clean my house and I didn't choose the cooking because as our friend, cooking's part of my identity. I'm Italian American. So making my kids meals is to me like being a mom. And if I got rid of that, then it would be it'd be a hit on my identity. However, there's other things that I could outsource as long as I made some sacrifices in the disposable income column, which said to my husband, and Allison knows, like, he wants to go out to the Wild West. He wants to ride in a covered with all this stuff. And I was like, guess what? We're going to the Dells, and then I'm getting a housekeeper because I just couldn't do it all. I also had to tackle some things about that maybe I had hangups about, like, oh, well, as a woman, I don't take out the trash or work on a car. I don't do those things. I was raised not to do those things in my traditional household. I had to tackle some of my own identity pieces and how they weren't serving my household as well. And so what we're going to do with our last few minutes together, friends, is we're going to get out those pens and we're going to ask you to think about a critical conversation that you need to have. Now, Allison and I have illuminated what some of these might be. I talked about a conversation with my husband, like, I know you got your heart set on this wild rest trip. And guess what? It's the Dells, because this is what's going to work for our household with the disposable income we've got. We have student loans, we have tuition for school. And so really taking a look, and he was like, that would be so good for our family. We've been cooped up in this house for 2 years. I'm like, I get it. But then after a week, we'd come back here. And that's not a sustainable well-being solution for our family. I can't be the type of leader I want to be. I can't be the type of mother I want to be. And so while this would be fun and awesome, it's not long-term sustainable. Now, some of you might be having a different conversation with a school leader around setting boundaries, with colleagues around, hey, we've been staying later. We've been doing this with our time. And so we're going to ask you to envision the conversation that you need to have. And then the future you is going to get a prize for something that our grandmothers used to say that Allison and I kind of forgot about. Gumption. This term gumption. My grandma used to say it. Allison's grandma used to say it. Hilarious that we look it up and look at the example from Google. She had the gumption to put her foot down and head off Dan from those crazy schemes. And so thinking about gumption, what does it mean to have gumption? To advocate for yourself, friends, to have agency. And so what we're going to ask now is that you think about your story of gumption. What does it look like? Who are the players? For mine, it was me with a conversation with my husband. Did you outsource anything? Like I had to outsource the housekeeping. Did I insource anything? Did I look internally and say, hey, you know what? The traditional roles of this house, maybe I should do that and you should do this. And what about lens and biases? As I mentioned, I was carrying some traditional baggage in, like women don't take care of the car. Who's that serving in my house? I got to get rid of that. And how do I do that, friends? By leaning into that SEL competency of self-awareness, stripping away the guilt, stripping away the shame, saying, this is what I bring to the table with my particular history, with my particular self, and I'm going to examine that. And so, Allison, for me, what was helpful is I wrote mine like a script. I wrote it out like Carla says this, then Rob says this, then Carla's going to say this, Rob's going to reject, he's going to say this. And that helped me prepare for the difficult conversation that I needed to have. Now, I want to hear some voices. Mary, Allison, as we close here, let's give away some more Starbucks gift cards. Friends, tell us, as you envision this conversation, your script, your scene of gumption, cue you, the lights go on. What does it sound like? And so Allison, Mary, let's call on some volunteers here. I want to hear their stories of gumption. Who are the players? What are they outsourcing? What are the tough conversations they're having to advocate for themselves? Allison, Mayor, what's showing up in the chat? And what are your thoughts, Allison? What's your scene of gumption, my friend?
Got a volunteer here, and Catherine, let's go to her.
Yes, well, I have 3 little boys in my house under 10, and I certainly need to do a better job at getting them active in taking over some of what I think I have to do everything. I think they need to do a little bit more. And I also assist with a curricular club at my school, and I need to start saying no to a few more of those things that I just feel guilted into doing, even though it's not my club. I do a lot of the work.
Catherine, I love you and I love this example. 1, because you're talking insourcing, right? And 2, having been a leader in Allison's, we know, we volunteer you, we lean on you. We're like, oh my gosh, Catherine's awesome. She'll stay late, she'll do everything. Don't let anyone volunteer you anymore, love. No more volunteering.
Right. Yes.
Allison, what do you think about what Catherine shared?
Well, bless you for having 3 boys, because I have 2 girls and I cannot imagine having 3 boys. So Nice work there. And yes, thinking about how, not just how do you have them be more engaged and take on more work, but how do they do it in a positive, productive way, right? That's something I'm always challenging myself as a mom to do, for sure, right? It's not about cleaning the dishes because you have to clean the dishes, but it's about contributing to our family and how does our family become whole. So we're trying this new, I'm not great at it yet, but we're trying this new puzzle piece idea, and everyone's got to take a piece of the puzzle every week and then put it together, so that we all have the puzzle piece. So, if you want to do that this week, then I'll do something else this week, and we sort of rotate in that way. But good example, Catherine. Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
And Catherine, don't forget to put your email address in the chat for Mary.
Okay.
Absolutely. One more friend to share. Do we have one more friend to share? What do we have? Mare, what are you seeing?
I'm looking.
We're looking. Now, again, friends, as we close here and we get our last volunteer, remembering that we're living in self-awareness here, that this is a self-awareness thing. If you're like, Carla, Allison, I don't know, I've never thought about it this way. Of course, it's a journey. It's a journey, right? And so really giving yourself permission to be like, I'm exploring this journey. And what my answer is today might not be my answer for the long term. And remembering this is this critical intersection of time and context. We covered a lot today. We're looking at SEL fatigue. We're looking at identifying solutions, but our context, because as Allison mentioned, is a pandemic, is changing. What works today might not always work. And so really giving yourself permission to be curious and operate from a place of curiosity versus thinking you got to be the expert around this stuff. It's tough. I want to make sure you also have my email address and Allison's email address. We are here to serve you. This isn't a one and done PD or a one and done professional learning experience. Let it be the start of our journey with you. We're here to serve you. We want to hear your voices. And so we'll close with one person to share as we wrap. Mary, Allison, we have one more person in the chat.
Yes, we have Janet Greenwood.
Hi.
Hi, Janet.
Yes. My son is 24. He lives away from home. He has a job. So we've done a great job raising him. My husband and I were like, you know what? It's our time. We both still work. But if we want to go for a little better meal than usual, we do. We buy a little bit better food because we don't have a 24-year-old human disposal in our house anymore. So that's kind of our self-care. We go places, we do things. We don't necessarily spend a lot of money. We just enjoy going and doing and being together.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Janet. So Allison, Mary, turning it over to you, and then we'll turn it over to Arlen to close. I am so grateful, Allison, this group knocked it out of the park. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Can we do a part 2, Arlen? We're getting a couple of questions about that. We are always here. You should certainly email us. We're happy to share our decks, share our resources, and really encourage you. Like I said, don't just take things on face value, because we're all supposed to be servant leaders, but really figure out, how can you be full at work? Can you be full at home and do everything to really keep yourself well? Not just have self-care opportunities.
Perfect. Great wrap up. Allison, Carla, thank you so much. These strategies are excellent. We all have learned so much, and we really appreciate our participants raising their hand and getting on the microphone. Hopefully, Mary, is there anything further you need to get them the Starbucks gift card, or are we good with email addresses?
Nope, I have everybody's email address. Thank you.
Okay, great. That's perfect. We are running a little over time, so we appreciate you staying on and making sure you got all the information you could get. Again, take down Allison and Carla's email addresses. I love the idea of a part 2. If they're up for it, hopefully we can look for that the next school year. Would be a great time for it.
We'd love to. It'd be an honor, Arlen.
Perfect. All right, everyone is free to log out. I'll be sending an email tomorrow with the recording, a link to the slides if they want to share them. And then of course the ISB evaluation that if our Illinois participants complete, we'll get the evidence of completion for 1 professional development clock hour. Thank you all so much for your attendance and your focus. You are free to leave the session with the large red button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen that will log you out for today. Thanks everybody, take care.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.